Welcome to the Peace Painter channel, where we explore the lives of historical figures who have helped bend the arc of the universe towards peace and well-being, and ponder how we might learn from their examples. I am Steve Simon, the Peace Painter, and today we're going to explore the extraordinary story of the great peacemaker of the Iroquois. Our story begins on the north shore of Lake Ontario. The events that unfolded centuries ago in this corner of North America helped heal a war-torn culture and had enormous influence on the pursuit of peace in the United States and across the world. Centuries ago, probably in the mid-15th century, a boy was born into the Huron-Wendat nation in modern-day Ontario. He was given the name Deganawidah, the master of things. He would eventually become known simply as the Great Peacemaker. He was gifted in many ways except one: he stammered. It was foretold that upon entering manhood, he would venture out to bring the good news of peace and power among the nations. One day, young Deganawidah received a vision, and who doesn't love a good vision, in which he saw a large white pine tree under which humanity was peacefully protected in the shade of the tree's branches. The boy recounted the vision and explained his peace-forging ambitions to his native people, and their response, the collective, meh. So at this point, Deganawidah is like, hey, I've got important ideas for humanity, and if you aren't gonna listen, I'm out of here. So he headed east toward the woodlands of modern-day New York State, where he found the strife-ridden territories of the Haudenosaunee, commonly known as the Iroquois, which included the nations of the Mohawk, Onondaga, Oneida, Cayuga, and Seneca. Warfare between these nations was common, and so too was internecine strife even within the nations. A culture of violent reciprocity dominated. If a family member was killed, it was incumbent upon a male within the family to exact revenge. Very much an eye for an eye kind of craziness. This violence spiraled without end. Deganawidah first encountered the Mohawks, who, though dubious of Deganawidah's vision, were open to his ability to prove it with a supernatural feat. They challenged him to climb a tall tree over a treacherous precipice above the Mohawk River. They would then cut the tree down, causing Deganawidah to plummet to certain death. If he were to survive, the Mohawks reasoned, it would be a sign Deganawidah's vision must be accepted. Deganawidah accepted the challenge and did, in fact, survive. The Mohawks thus were the first to accept Deganawidah's vision and its broader purpose. Just a quick promo: you can support the Peace Painter channel in one of three ways. First, on Patreon, for as little as $1 per month, you can receive these videos ad-free and gain access to the Peace Painter community through my Discord server. The second way to support the channel: you can purchase my original art and prints at stevesimon.com. In addition to my Peacemaker paintings, you'll find a wide variety of landscapes to choose from. The third way to support the channel is to learn how to paint yourself. If you're interested in oil painting lessons from beginner to advanced, you can peruse my classes on Skillshare. You'll find classes outlining the basics of drawing, mixing color and brushwork, to the distinctly different painting approaches of classical academic painting and alla prima. Links to each of these are in the show notes below. Now back to the video. Venturing deeper into the woodlands, Deganawidah met a deeply depressed, wandering Onondaga man whose wife and 7 daughters had been murdered at the hands of their own nation's chief. The wicked chief's name was Ototaro, the Entangled. Aimed at addressing the vengeful rage in the wanderer's heart, Deganawidah performed a condolence ritual with strings of wampum and asked the wanderer to gaze at the sky to find peace. The wanderer thus overcame his grief and received the new mind. But there's more good news for Deganawidah. He quickly realized, hey, this guy has something I really need. The newly enlightened warrior was a brilliant orator. Deganawidah has the ideas and his new friend can communicate them. Together, they forge an unstoppable duo, a regular Batman and Robin working their way through the woodlands. With the additional support of the Mohawks, the dynamic duo was able to bring the Oneida into this new alliance. Soon thereafter, the Cayugas and Senecas also agreed to join. The League, as envisioned by Deganawidah, was beginning to take shape. Of all the Iroquois nations, only the powerful Onondaga refused to accept the vision of the peace-sharing League. Their wicked chief, Ototaro, whose hair was said to crawl with snakes, rebuked any plans for peace. Remember, this is the beast who was responsible for killing the family of Deganawidah's partner. So somehow Deganawidah convinced his partner that he would be the one to, quote, comb the snakes from Ototaro's hair. In so doing, the wanderer would earn the name Hiawatha, or he who combs. With brilliant stagecraft, diplomacy, song, and oratory, the dynamic duo convinced Ototaro to bring the Onondaga into the League. Upon his conversion, Ototaro received the name Firekeeper and was promised the Great Council fire should always burn in Onondaga territory. Thus, these Iroquois nations formed the League of Five Nations. After the vision of the League had thus been agreed upon, Deganawidah set about establishing the Great Law. So remember the big, beautiful tree in the vision as a child? As part of the ceremony to establish the Great Law, a white pine was uprooted. All the weapons of war were buried where the tree had stood. The tree was then replanted on top of the weapons. This is where the saying, bury the hatchet, comes from. Deganawidah then recited the Great Law of Peace, arguably the first constitution of a democratic confederation on the planet. The parallels with the future U.S. Constitution are striking. The Great Law preserved and protected the independence and liberties of each individual, each clan, and each nation, while uniting the five nations into a confederacy committed to inward well-being and outward strength. Raw materials and hunting grounds were to be shared, all religions were to be accepted, unauthorized search was prohibited, immigration into a nation within the League was welcome regardless of ethnicity, but predicated upon acceptance of the Great Law. Checks and balances were also built into the branches of the Great Law through a bicameral legislature and executive body. The Mohawks, Senecas, and Onondagas constituted the elder brothers, and the Oneidas and Cayugas the younger brothers. The Onondagas filled the role of executive power, including calling the councils to order and maintaining the veto privilege. An Onondaga chief with the title of Ototaro would remain forever as head chief of the Great Council. Now, generations later, Europeans began arriving on Turtle Island, as the Iroquois called North America. The early colonists, vulnerable to life in a strange land, interacted with the natives of the New World. Of course, we've all heard about the horrific clashes between these civilizations, but what is less frequently discussed are the alliances that were struck and the ideas that were shared across these cultural divides. In 1744, a charismatic Onondaga chief by the name of Canesatego attended the Treaty of Lancaster to negotiate a land transaction with British colonists. There he urged the colonists in attendance to form a confederation of colonies. His speech included the suggestion, and I'm quoting, "We are a powerful confederacy and, by your observing the same methods our wise forefathers have taken, you will acquire fresh strength and power." End of quote. Unfortunately, the colonists, just like Deganawidah's native Huron Wendat's when he shared his vision, were like, meh. They just didn't grasp the importance of unity either. In the audience of Canesatego's speech, however, was a 38-year-old Benjamin Franklin. By this time, he had already been a publisher for 15 years and had published Indian treaty accounts for 6 years. Franklin regularly attended Iroquois council meetings. He had already become intimately familiar with their culture and affairs. Most importantly, He understood the strength of the Iroquois Confederacy and how it stood in stark contrast to the feeble disunity the colonies had at the time. He was completely baffled by the colonists' tepid reaction to Kennesatego's advice. So Franklin took up the cause and would become a tireless advocate for the Confederation of the Colonies. In May 1754, he published the famous Join or Die cartoon in his Pennsylvania Gazette. The cartoon appeared 2 months before the Albany Congress would convene to take up the long contested issue of creating a formal union of colonies. At the Congress, Franklin presented his Albany Plan of Union. It was accepted by the Albany Congress attendees, but eventually struck down by the colonial assemblies and, not surprisingly, by representatives of the British Crown to whom the colonists still answered at the time. Still, Franklin would not relent and continued to push the issue over the ensuing decades until he finally started to gain traction through the most unfortunate of motivations: the specter of war. After the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775, the Second Continental Congress brought delegates from colonies together with the obvious need for cooperation in fighting the looming Revolutionary War. In 1776, the Congress agreed to the Declaration of Independence. Franklin, meanwhile, participated in authoring the Articles of Confederation, which aimed to establish a firm league among the 13 independent colonies. The final draft of the Articles was written in late 1777, naming the proposed Confederation the United States of America. It would still take nearly 4 more years to negotiate each of the states' demands, but on March 1st, 1781, the Articles of Confederation were ratified by all states. It had been 37 years since Franklin heard Kennesatego's speech. Franklin, then 75 years old, had at long last lived to see the colonies choose unity. Why then, in our big picture, is this important in bending the arc towards peace and well-being? Well, quite simply, we often take the idea of peaceful confederation supported by the rule of law completely for granted in our day. As we have seen, it took nearly 40 years for the first such bold example to take hold in the civilized world. The healing brought about by the great Peacemaker and the subsequent League of Five Nations, later expanded to 6, provided a living example that such a thing was possible. Theirs is the example by which the United States, the European Union, the United Nations, and others brought dissimilar peoples together under the rule of law for express purpose of improving peace and well-being. Now, the Iroquois influence thesis on the Constitution of the United States, as it's called, is a source of ongoing debate among historians. It should be noted, however, that in 1988, the United States Congress formally recognized the contributions of the Iroquois Confederacy. House Concurrent Resolution 331 acknowledged the profound Iroquois influence. The confederation of the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the political system developed by the Iroquois Confederacy, as were many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself. Interestingly, Iroquois society is matrilineal and matrifocal. As we shall see in a later video, this would also play a decidedly influential role in another significant piece of American history and in bending another important segment of our arc. In closing, I want to speak briefly about the symbolism I incorporated into this painting. The composition depicts the climatic scene of the Iroquois Great Law of Peace. The great peacemaker, Deganawidah, sings as he gazes upward, for as he taught, we do our best thinking of peace when he gaze upon the sky. The great peacemaker lays his healing hands on Adotaro and utters the incantation. Thy mind is made straight, thy head is now combed. The 7 crooks have been taken from thy body. Now thou too hast a new mind. Meanwhile, Hiawatha combs the snakes from Adotaro's hair. Hiawatha wears a wampum belt draped from his shoulder across his torso. The Hiawatha Belt, as it has since become known, symbolizes the League of Five Nations. The five onlookers are likewise symbolic of the five nations. They lean and sit on a fallen tree, representing the toppling of the old warfaring paradigm and the venture into the new peace-seeking league. The geometry of the golden spiral, which I have used throughout this collection to symbolize the arc of the universe bending towards peace and well-being, is employed as a compositional tool in this painting. Its eye is in the center of the snake tattoo on Autotaro's arm. It follows the curve of the rock upon which he lays and is then picked up by his arching back. The spiral points to the Achilles heel of Autotaro, suggesting the vulnerable point for defeating the mighty warrior and, by extension, the triumph of peace over war. In the next installment of The Great Peacemakers, we will explore the biography of a British colonist influenced by Franklin and the Iroquois who believed, quote, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again," end quote. I am Steve Simon, the Peace Painter. Thank you for watching until the end, and thank you for your interest in making our world more peaceful tomorrow than it is today.